My mother is marrying a monster tomorrow. I'm the only one who remembers. My widowed mother was arranged to marry Lorenzo, a powerful mafia capo. I thought his status would finally bring us protection. But on the third day of their marriage, Lorenzo moved his pregnant mistress, Camilla, into the estate's master suite. She loudly claimed the child in her womb was the orphaned blood of a fallen soldier. A capo of Lorenzo's stature is doing your mother a service. The syndicate wives mocked me, demanding we accept our place. Camilla systematically seized my mother's territory cuts and subjected her to endless psychological torture, while Lorenzo simply turned a blind eye. When the baby was born, it bore the exact same distinct birthmark on its neck as Lorenzo. Only then did we realize Lorenzo had used my mother as a convenient shield for his illicit affair, stealing my dead father's legacy and slowly draining our lives away. I didn't understand why the family's brutal justice allowed a thief to siphon funds under the guise of caring for a martyr's widow, leaving us to die in absolute disgrace. Opening my eyes again, I was back to the day before the mob wedding. Looking at my 6-year-old hands, I grabbed the torn marriage petition and stole the secret trust documents. This time, I ran straight to the heavily guarded gates of Don Salvatore, the most ruthless executioner in the city. Chapter 1. Sienna POV. Prologue. My mother is marrying a monster tomorrow. I'm the only one who remembers what he'll do to us. How? In 3 days, his pregnant mistress will sleep in my mother's bed, and how, year by year, he will steal everything my father died to protect until we are left with nothing but dust and disgrace. That's why I ran. That's why I'm here, kneeling on freezing stones in front of the scariest man in the city. The cold of the cobblestones bit through the thin fabric of my dress as I knelt before the syndicate gates, a torn marriage petition clutched in my 6-year-old hands. My knees hurt, but not as much as my heart hurt in my past life. I knew with a certainty that felt older than I was that if I did not stop my mother from marrying Capo Lorenzo tomorrow, his pregnant mistress would slowly drain our lives away, just as she had done in my past life. These great iron gates belong to Don Salvatore Romano. Mama once said he eats traitors for breakfast. I didn't know if that was true, but I hoped he was hungry. Before him, even the most defiant capos were known to cup their hands around a match when lighting his cigar. That part one remembered for real. Men spoke his name only in dark alleys, understanding he was a ruthless executioner who demanded undeniable proof before painting his gardens with the blood of traitors. Still, the calculated danger in his posture and the weight of his power were the only things that could now save us. A group of mafia wives stood a few feet away, the winter light catching the frost on the collars of their mink coats. They looked like a pack of angry, perfumed wolves. They looked down at me, and in their gaze was a disgust so plain it needed no adulteration. Rosa crossed her arms, the motion tight and dismissive. "Your mother is a fortunate woman," she muttered to the others, her words like chipped porcelain. "A capo of Lorenzo's stature is doing her a service, taking in a widow with such baggage." Her words settled like a stone in my stomach, a cold and sickening dread. But it was a stone that sparked a fire. I remembered the precise sequence of events from my previous life. On the third day of that arranged marriage, Camilla had moved into the estate. She had systematically seized my mother's territory cuts and subjected her to endless psychological torture, while Lorenzo had simply turned a blind eye. His eyes were always so cold, like a dead fish, just like I remembered. I was not going to let history repeat itself. While my mother was out securing a bespoke black silk dress for the coming mob wedding, I had stolen the syndicate trust documents. I had run for miles on legs that were far too short for the task, just to reach the Don's estate. A crunch of tires on gravel pulled me from my thoughts as a sleek, armored SUV pulled up to the gates. The heavy doors groaned open, and Lorenzo stepped out. He wore a custom Italian suit that bore not a single crease, but the knuckles of a hand holding his cigar were the color of dead fish. A practiced mask of compassion was arranged on his features. It was a liar's face, and I knew it better than my own. When he saw me huddled on the ground, he sighed softly and reached down with a gentle hand to help me up. I slapped his hand away with a force that jarred my own shoulder. I then threw the torn marriage petition directly onto his polished leather shoes. I angled my chin up, fixing my eyes on him, and screamed with a voice I hoped would carry to every guard on the perimeter. The bastard in Camilla's womb is not the bloodline of a fallen soldier. A profound silence fell over the heavily guarded gates. The only sound was the low, humming idle of the SUV's engine outside the walls. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Lorenzo's hand froze midair. His charismatic smile slipped, and what replaced it was a dark vacancy in his eyes that promised violence. I saw it! I saw the monster behind the mask. Score 1 for the 6-year-old. Enforcer Ricci stepped forward from the unmoving line of guards, his thumb stroking the handle of his weapon. "Do not break omerta with falsehoods, child," he warned, his voice low and raspy, as he defended Lorenzo's honor. "The capo is merely protecting a dead brother's family." I pivoted my head slowly on my neck and met the enforcer's gaze. Adults were always so slow to see the truth, even when it was screaming right in front of them. "Does protecting a fallen brother's family require giving a mistress the master suite of the capo's estate?" I asked, my voice disarmingly steady for a child. A collective, sharp intake of breath came from the wives, a sound like dry leaves skittering across the courtyard. Rosa and the others drew in around me, their bodies forming a tight, predatory circle. They began to scold me, their voices a chaotic overlap of outrage. A fatherless brat has no right to question the arrangements of the family. Rosa's voice cut through the others. My grip on the trust documents tightened until the edges bit into my palms. Rosa's words were a sharp, cold wind, but they could not extinguish the fire of my past life's memories, the slow starvation, the endless humiliation, the day I watched my mother's spirit finally break. I would die again before I let that future unfold. My plan was working. The Don's guards had heard me. There was no turning back now. Sienna POV. The monster's smile was gone now. Good. I wanted his ugly, real face out in the open. Lorenzo gave no sign. He had heard the explosive accusation. The color of his eyes seemed to darken, shifting to the murky, volatile gray of churning storm water. Mama's eyes looked like the sky before a summer storm. His just looked like a dirty puddle. He stepped closer, his considerable frame eclipsing the sun and casting a long, cold shadow over me. "Did Valentina orchestrate this display?" he demanded, the question edged with suspicion. I tightened my grip on the thick stack of trust documents, holding them securely behind my back. "My mother knows nothing of this," I stated. My voice didn't shake, but my knees wanted to. She would never have permitted me to step into the crosshairs if she knew my purpose. At my defiance, Lorenzo's handsome features seemed to freeze, becoming a mask of cold stone, like the gargoyles on the old cathedral. His gaze passed over me as if I were a piece of refuse to be scraped from the sole of a shoe. "You ran away," he accused, his voice cracking like a whip, "and caused a contemptible scene that brings disrespect to the family." I held his gaze without flinching. A monster in my face was still better than a slow death in my own home. "I ran away to save my mother from a monster," I admitted. A ripple of derisive laughter passed through the gathered syndicate wives. They laughed like hyenas, happy to see someone else being torn apart. They pointed their manicured fingers at me, their whispers of venomous commentary on my lack of manners. Ignoring them, Lorenzo crouched, bringing his face level with mine. His voice dropped to a silken whisper, a tone meant only for me and the nearest guards. His breath smelled like coffee and lies. "Camilla is the sister of Dominic, a fallen soldier," he claimed, his eyes narrowing. "I am bound by a blood oath to see to her welfare." I stared into the capo's lying, stormwater eyes. He was so good at this. But I'd seen this movie before. I knew the ending. "How many months pregnant is Camilla?" I asked, my voice ringing with crystalline clarity. Lorenzo did not hesitate. "She is 4 months along," he answered. "That is fascinating," I replied, feeling the trap snap shut on him, considering Soldier Dominic was killed in a cartel shootout precisely 2 months ago. The laughter from the wives was cut off, as if by a guillotine. The silence that followed was a physical weight, a pressure on the eardrums that comes before a storm. In that quiet, the ugly truth from my past life surfaced. Camilla had loudly claimed the child was Dominic's orphan blood. But when the baby was born, it bore the same distinct birthmark on its neck as Lorenzo. Lorenzo's sharp features seemed to stiffen, a mask of shock taking hold. I did that! I made a capo look like a stupid, caught rat. I could see the precise moment he understood he had walked into a trap laid by a 6-year-old. Behind him, Enforcer Ricci hesitated, his stoic expression faltering. Leaning in, he spoke in a low tone, confirming the timeline of Dominic's death to the surrounding guards. Lorenzo's gaze snapped back to my face. His large hands balled into tight, white-knuckled fists. I thought he might hit me. I wanted him to try. If he hit me now, the whole world would see. "Who taught you to spin such dangerous fictions?" he demanded, his voice strained with a rage he could barely contain. I lifted my chin, meeting his fury with a calm I did not feel, and answered, "My father, Carlo. I read the secret journals he left behind." Lorenzo's face went slack for a fraction of a heartbeat, the mask cracking just enough to reveal the terror beneath. Secret journals. The words hung between us like a live grenade. I watched his mind race, frantically cataloging every document he had ever signed, every backroom deal, every drop of blood he had spilled beside my father, and he realized, with dawning horror, that he had no idea what Carlo might have written down before he died. Sienna POV. I knew he'd try to grab the papers. Bullies always did. So I ran. As Lorenzo lunged forward to snatch the trust documents, I had already anticipated his move. He was big and slow. I was small and fast, and I wasn't afraid to get scraped knees. I bolted toward the inner courtyard as fast as my small legs could carry me, my lungs aching as I screamed at the top of my lungs for an audience with Don Salvatore. The cobblestones were uneven and slick with morning dew. My shoe slipped, and the impact of my knees on the hard stone sent a jarring shock up my legs, scraping the skin. I didn't stop. The sting was nothing compared to what would happen if I lost. Lorenzo caught up to me instantly. His large hand clamped down on my arm, a brutal pressure that felt as if it bruised the bone. His fingers were like iron bars. The mafia wives trailed behind us, their frantic voices urging Lorenzo to silence the brat before she brought the Don's wrath upon them all. They weren't worried about me. They were just scared for themselves. They sounded terrified of the noise I was making. A raw desperation took hold of me. I turned my head and sank my teeth deep into Lorenzo's hand. The skin was salty, and the fabric of his glove was rough, and I bit down with every bit of hate from my other life. He cursed loudly, yanking his hand away and sending me tumbling backward onto the ground. The trust documents scattered across the gray stone. For one terrible second, my heart stopped. They were everything. The papers slid across the courtyard and were abruptly stopped by the polished, bespoke leather shoe of Don Salvatore. I looked up. The Dark Don stood atop the marble steps, attended by his underboss and consigliere. He wasn't just a man. He was a shadow given form, a weight in the air that made it hard to breathe. The air around him seemed to grow dense, heavy with an authority that suffocated. His chilling voice echoed across the courtyard, demanding to know who dared assault a child on his grounds. Lorenzo immediately straightened his posture, adopting the stance of a loyal, respectful capo. He was a better actor than anyone on TV. He dismissed the chaos with a smooth tone, explaining that his future stepdaughter was just throwing a tantrum over the wedding. I scrambled up from the ground, a trickle of blood making its way down my scraped knees. I made sure the Don could see the blood. I grabbed the torn marriage petition from the cobblestones and thrust it toward the Don, objecting to the family-sanctioned union. I then turned my fierce gaze to the mocking wives. I asked them loudly if it was syndicate tradition for a made man to move his pregnant mistress into the family estate the day before his wedding. Don Salvatore's gaze, heavy and lethal, shifted slowly from me to Lorenzo, and the temperature in the courtyard seemed to drop. He demanded an explanation for the estate arrangements. Lorenzo smoothly lied, claiming Camilla was frail and only staying temporarily for protection. The Don's expression did not shift. His gloved fingers drummed once against the silver head of his cane, a single, measured beat that echoed through the silent courtyard like the tick of a clock counting down. Every capo in the family knew what that sound meant. IT was the sound of Don Salvatore filing away a discrepancy, cataloging a debt. I'd won. I'd really won. The Don was listening to me, a child, and not to the lying capo. Lorenzo's smooth lies had bought him minutes, not absolution. I had seen that look in my past life, always moments before someone's garden was painted red.